back to my channel. I have a very interesting book that I wanted to share with you today. Not necessarily because you care that much about King Arthur, but I have found in reading books about King Arthur a couple of things very interesting. Stay tuned. Alright, so I'm going to start with the very first thing that I find very interesting about King Arthur. He was a real king. He was not some fantastical figure coming out of the mists of Avalon, some great fictional character. He was absolutely a real person. And that's going to turn the literary world up on its head, because if you've seen the latest movie with, I think his name is Charlie Hunnam, playing that character, Jude Law, Guy Ritchie is the director of that movie. They've still got it well within the realm of the fantastical with magic and everything, because without a lot of supporting documents, it's hard to root King Arthur in fact. But a lady has done it, and that's another book and another video for me to review for you. But she has found, through researching the ancient resources and where King Arthur has been mentioned in other ancient literature, like in French and German, she has found the actual locations where battles took place. And his importance in English history is not that he was necessarily a great king, it's that at the time, which was actually 500 AD, thereabouts, the Romans had just left England, and the Anglo-Saxons and Normans were coming across and trying to take it over. And what he did was successfully fight everybody and keep England sort of, you know, as a united country, and not farmed out little bits to other leaders. That's one really cool thing, and one that I found in this book. And when we have to look at this book in its context, it was written originally, you know, stories about King Arthur were written in the fantastical way and in ballads and stuff in the year right around 1100, 1200, when courtly love and rules of knighthood and everything were the norm for the society, and they romanticized this figure, King Arthur, who came from 600 years earlier. So what you have going on with the people who are making up these tales about him is they had religion now. Christianity had been in Europe since, you know, Ireland about 400, England about 800, the Vikings got it about the year 1000, and so Christianity had been around, and they applied that back to the year 500 in King Arthur. But in this book, lots of things happening in King Arthur's court and his round table, which BT Dubs wasn't really a table, are revolving around what they call the feasts of Pentecost, of Christmas, of like Whitsuntide. But Pentecost figures very prominently, and so does Christmas, and they call it a feast. So what that says to a Hebrew believer who's done their studying and looking into history is, through 300 AD, Constantine changed the Shabbat and changed the nature of the religion that was passed down by the apostles once Christ had been crucified. So what we're getting is the Feast of Pentecost was still around, and no doubt because it is in Acts 2 where the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is granted or given by Yeshua to his followers. And here's a little trivia question for you. What comes directly before him? John 14. He says, I'm going to send you a comforter. What comes right before that? Anyway, on to my point. So we're seeing remnants of what the apostles hand down all the way to the 1100s when these men start writing about Arthur. The Feast of Pentecost was still called a feast. It wasn't, you know, like a church holy day or something. So 300 it changed, and then it gets passed on and passed on. And then eventually it comes to us in the 20th, 21st centuries. The church has completely disregarded these feasts of the Lord, and then a remnant goes back and looks at it. So I found that really interesting. The third thing about that book I found really interesting is this knight, I think it's King Arthur. He goes on a quest, a lot of them were. It's where you get information about locations and battles and stuff. And in it, he's supposed to ask, what is it that women most want? And so he asks a lot of people. He writes down answers in a book. He goes to this knight who has said, you know, if you can't figure this out, I'm going to get to lop your head off. And he's approached by a woman who is in some sort of magical disguise, and she's truly ugly. And she says, if you let me marry one of your knights, I will tell you the secret. And so they make the deal. One of the knights says, yep, I'll marry her, even though she's hideous. And she tells him the secret. And the secret, to me, fascinating statement about what is going on then, and then bring it forward to what goes on now. The secret of what women want is to reign over men. Wow, really? So if you think about 500, actually the history in that time shows that women were given a lot of stature in society in those days. Irish women could be lawyers, they could be doctors, they could be, British women could be leaders, and they could lead men into battle. They could own property and have titles. And then in the 1100s, I think it kind of regressed back down. I have no idea why. Maybe because, you know, the plague came through and hardly anyone survived. Women become more valuable and therefore need to be more controlled. But in courtly love, you know, the woman is gorgeous and she's pure, but she's an object on a pedestal to be admired, and the men do all the actions to protect her, and she can't even really leave the castle. As a matter of fact, we gotta throw a big metal girdle on her, you know, while we're gone, just to protect her. So women want to reign over men in the eyes of these 11th century writers. Interesting. So what's going on in our society today? Still the same thing. And people on the women's rights edge of the argument would say, and we're still arguing for it. I would say it's time to stop arguing about it and to let things happen as they happen. There are very powerful women now. There were very powerful women then. Even in biblical days, Zelophehad's daughters get to take his inheritance because there are no sons. Women had certain rights. There were rights for people in Elizabethan times where women, if she was a widow, she could run her husband's shop. And so I still wonder, you know, what is fueling that? It's just fascinating to me. And so those are three things that you may not have known about King Arthur, and books that I found the information in. I think it's fascinating. All right, bless you, shalom. So the book and the author, the other book about King Arthur that's really got great information in it, is by Norma Lorre, L-O-R-R-E, Goodrich, and it's called King Arthur. If I get a chance, I'll post a link to it down in the video, but it's almost Passover, so I don't know if I'll get around to that. But it's Norma, L-O-R-R-E, Lorre Goodrich, and it's really cool the way she gets all the historical facts together about what was going on in England at that time. All right, shalom.